Hey there, and thanks for listening to the Beekeeping for Newbies podcast. Just a quick note, we're keeping the show ad-free right now, so if you're hearing ads, they're coming from your podcast player and not from us. If you find value in what we're doing, we'd love to hear from you. We rely on support from listeners like you to keep the lights on and keep the content flowing. Thanks for being here. Now let's get into the episode. Hey everybody, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to Beekeeping for Newbies. Thank you so very much for taking the time to listen. I do appreciate you. And as always, feel free to reach out, Jeff at beekeepingfornewbies.com. That's NEWBEES.com. All right, folks, here we are today at episode 120. We're talking about pollen traps. This is a discussion that came up in the Discord room. And since it is kind of the generally slow time of year in the bee world, aside from the Master Beekeeper program that we're working on, there's a little bit of extra time, and I figured I'd jump right on this and get this one knocked out for the Discord team, and of course for anybody else who's interested in listening. Now, if you are a new listener and you're jumping in right now, I don't want you to feel like we're deliberately trying to get ahead of you here by throwing any advanced concepts at you or anything. What we did is we spent a lot of energy back around episodes, 0, 1, all the way up through 25 or 30. Focusing a lot on the real introductory, brand new, I'm a first-time beekeeper or thinking about it kind of concepts. And what we're trying to do now is, I've spent a lot of energy over the last 4 years in just keeping things very, very basic and really, really trying to make sure that we're getting those entry-level beekeepers covered. But it's time to expand a little bit. I've had a lot of people over the years that have said, hey, that was really fun for, the 101 kind of level stuff. But it's time to get into the nitty gritty and get to the 201, 301. So we are trying to do just that and moving into some more advanced stuff. But the good news is we're not going to lose track and lose sight of the importance of what it is to start out. So I kind of have two things going in tandem right now. We got the pollen traps episode that I'm doing right here. And the next episode is finding a mentor. Now, back around episode 43, we discussed this, being a good mentor and a good mentee. And I think we covered things fairly well, but there's all kinds of concepts and different things to consider and think about. And I'm going to revisit this a little bit, not because back then I was kind of focused on what it means to be good. How can I be a good mentor to someone else? How can you be a good mentee to me as your mentor? This one, episode 121, is going to be things you need to be looking at, questions you need to be asking, and very, very specifically focused towards finding, just finding one in general, which can offer quite a few challenges. So we're talking about that on the next episode. And I have another thing. I've been doing some video the last couple of days. What I'm trying to do is a separate series I'm going to run in tandem with this. Unfortunately, I don't really have a good way to identify it other than by the title. So please just listen to everything and it'll be in there. But I did a thing in my yard and I kind of walked around the yard and I was recording different parts of the yard. Because what I'm going to do is we're going to take it from the very beginning. I'm going to do an episode where I say, okay, this is what it looks like for a brand new beekeeper just starting out. And you're like, okay, I've made the decision that I want to do this. What's the next step? So what we're going to do is we're going to have a discussion here on the podcast. We're going to talk about, hey, here's all the things you should do. Find out through your local laws, local ordinances, regardless of where you are. Wherever you are in the world, you're going to have to adhere to somebody's regulations. So whether it might be a province or a country, like a federal type of law, state, local, whatever it comes down to for where you are, some government entity somewhere is going to tell you what you can and can't do. And you kind of have to play by the rules. So we're going to walk you through what that process looks like, making sure you're doing the research, asking the questions, and having the forethought to make sure it's okay for you to even have bees anyway. I mean, how bad would it be if you go through all the work, effort, and energy to go and get your bees, get everything set up, and then have some government official come by and say, like, yeah, you can't do that. So after that episode, we get through that, you know what you got to do for that level of things and that aspect of the research. I'm going to walk you around my yard. I'm going to take you through my yard, and I have to kind of balance my time just right around the barking dog so that I don't have audio issues out there while I'm walking through the yard. But we'll walk you out there, and I'm going to show you in my yard where I'm putting hives this spring. And I'm going to tell you why I'm putting them in there. And it'll be a combination of both actual video footage in my yard. If I can find my stupid drone, I have the drone, not the battery. So it's kind of a weird thing, but I'd love to get just a drone picture from above so I can show you, okay, here's north, south, east, west. Here's why I'm doing this and that. But anyway, I've started that video. We're going to get that going, but we're going to be running these in tandem between the podcast and the YouTube channel. And the idea behind this is you can hear something online and then watch me go through the process. So for example, on the first one, I'm going to tell you all the legalities and things you need to be thinking about from ordinances, laws, whatever. And then I'm going to go online, just do a screen capture of me searching. I live in the state of Virginia. So we're going to search through Virginia law, look up, what kind of setbacks there might be, any kind of rules for number of hives per property. I'll have to check with my city. So we'll go to the city website. We'll do some searches and I'll just do a screenshot. We'll capture that. We'll put it on YouTube and that'll be that one. The second one will be the same thing. We're going to have a discussion about it. And then you'll see me in the yard, walking through the yard, pointing out where I'm going to put things. And as I continue through this series, we're going to go through it all. Okay, we determined where we're going to put the hives. And then from there, we're going to go ahead and, I will be assembling some. I have a ton of hardware to assemble. I'm going to show you how I assemble my hardware. I'm going to show you how I paint my hardware. I'm going to show you how I put it together in the yard. We're going to walk through all this stuff, both on the podcast and in person. Now, there's some things that in person, like you're going to show up at the house on YouTube. Now, there are some things that aren't going to make sense to go both ways there, right? I'm not going to get on the podcast and be like, okay, everybody, right now, I know you can't see this, but we're painting. Isn't that cool? I bet you wish it just doesn't work. So some of the things we're going to actually do, like I said, on YouTube, you'll see a video. Other things are going to be just on the podcast, but we'll balance it together so that hopefully if you're a brand new beekeeper and you're like, holy cow, I have no idea what I should do, where I should start, you can just jump in, figure it all out. And hopefully by the time, I think I can get this wrapped up, I think by the end of February. I'm going to be freezing my butt off outside, but that's okay. I don't mind. But we should be able to get this wrapped up by the end of February, maybe mid-March, and that should put you in pretty good time. As part of that process too, I'm going to order some packaged bees. I'm thinking about what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and order 2 for myself. I'll just have 2 for the house. If, I was thinking about something else. I have a lot of experiments I want to do. I have experiments around let me see if my experiment list is here. Oh, I have some feeding bees experiments I want to do, feeding some of them junk and some of them some supplemental feed. I've got feeding some of them fondant, feeding others nothing, feeding some of them pollen patties, having quilt boxes in some, no quilt boxes in others. Just all these little experiments I want to do. And I'm going to figure out some way of maybe almost like a system to figure out how we can kind of work together on that a little bit. I'm not 100% certain. We'll come back to that. Anyway, that's what I'm working on in tandem with all the other stuff and the Master Beekeeper program and all of that. I've got about 50% of the program for the apprentice is in the hands of my peer reviewers. They're going through things. By the time we get to the end of the year, I've got about 10 or 11 days to get the other half to them. And then by mid-January, I'll have all of their reviews. And hopefully by mid-February, have that wrapped up and then get a couple videos done. And we should be still on target right now for our 1 April release on the apprentice program. All right. Enough chitter chatter, pitter patter, chit chat. Anyway, enough of the non-pollen trap related discussion. Let's just jump right in and talk about it here. So before we really dive into what pollen traps are and how to collect pollen, let's take a little step back here and ask an important question. Why are we even talking about pollen? What's so special about it? And why do we as beekeepers cherish it in the first place? Pollen isn't just, this random dust that shows up and annoys everybody and messes with your sinuses. It is a very deliberate and essential part of the survival of the honeybees. You see, pollen is the primary source of protein for honeybees. It contains 10 essential amino acids that the bees absolutely have to have and cannot produce on their own. So these amino acids play a huge role in keeping the colony strong and allowing them to thrive. So let's break it down a little bit further as to some of the specifics, specific areas where there's real benefit and where, not even a benefit, where it's really a requirement for protein and high levels of it, particularly in the springtime. So brood development. Those amino acids are absolutely essential for larval growth. They help the larvae synthesize proteins And this is everything that they need to form healthy cells and tissues. So without a good supply of pollen, the developing bees, they simply just can't grow properly. And you'll see sometimes it's really subtle. So to the naked eye and to a person who's not taking measurements, it's difficult to see. But you can definitely see some things with sizes in bees. And another thing that you'll notice in particular, though, and again, it's really hard. It's hard to see. It's like you don't know what you don't know. And what I mean specifically is, let's say I took 2 colonies side by side, and I had one that I just fed sugar syrup all the time because I wanted them to grow huge and just constantly be rearing brood. And then I had one next to them that was getting the sugar syrup, but it was also supplemented with some pollen, whether it's natural or a synthetic substitute or whatever it might be. They may look very similar from the outside. They're still producing brood. They're still storing, nectar. And they may not look all that different, but the difference is going to come into the overall health, right? But you're not going to get as good of a quality of life. So they're not going to be as resistant to illness or disease. Their lifespan is not going to be as long. So maybe in the summertime, and I'm going to throw a number out there, it's a little bit generic, but in the summertime, typically a worker bee is going to live somewhere in that like 32, 36 to 45, 48 day range. I like to just target about 40 days. So if they're averaging a 40-day lifespan as a healthy bee, getting all the proteins and all the resources and amino acids and everything they need, and then you have another colony, for example, that is not getting all the nutrients it needs, well, they may be living 35, 36 days. Is that a big deal? Is that going to make a difference? How does that impact that colony? How does that impact your apiary? How does it impact the genetics that you're trying to breed for? How does it impact everything, right? It's hard to know. If you're a brand new beekeeper and you have a colony and all your workers are living 36 days and your neighbor, their bees are living 40 days, so what? These are things that are really difficult to measure. So you almost have to just kind of take everybody's word for it that like, no, this is kind of the best practice. This is what's best for their health. But as your bees go up against disease, illness, fighting varroa, fighting any kind of viruses that may try to infect them, that's where, it's just like people. If you have people who are exercising and eating healthy, maybe they're taking some vitamin supplements or whatever it might be, these people are going to be far better equipped to fight illness than people who sit around and eat a lot of junk food and are pretty lethargic and have a sedentary lifestyle. So that's just something to kind of keep in the back of your mind. But adult bees rely on these amino acids to maintain their muscle function and overall health. So healthy workers are absolutely the backbone of the hive, right? They forage, they do all the defending, they care for the young in the form of the nurse bees. A diet that is rich in these essential amino acids helps to produce a robust workforce. So a strong, healthy bee is far better equipped for foraging, hive maintenance, and much more likely to survive, the challenges of overwintering. Just a quick reminder to check out our YouTube channel. You can play the podcast there, explore our videos, and find even more beekeeping content to help you along the way. If you enjoy what you see, please subscribe to the channel and let us know how we can help you on your beekeeping journey. Now, back to the show. So where do these amino acids come from? They come from pollen, right? Different plants produce pollens with different amino acid profiles. So this is why it's really important to expose your colonies, to expose your bees to a diverse forage type within your environment. So the more variety of pollen they can collect, the better the chances are that they're getting a good balanced diet. This is why you'll hear me say whenever I'm talking about, sugar syrup feeding, to try to integrate some kind of a pollen sub or supplement in, so that they're not just living on sugar alone. It's just like feeding kids a bunch of candy, right? Yeah, they're going to run hard and fast for a little while, but they're going to crash pretty hard. So when we talk about collecting pollen, we're talking about a vital resource that not only supports the health of the individual bees, but the strength and the survival of the entire colony. So understanding this will help us better appreciate why pollen traps are used and why some beekeepers go through the effort to harvest and store that pollen. So now we kind of know why it matters. Let's get into the details of how to collect it, store it, and kind of some of the pros and cons to using pollen traps. So one thing that you can do is you can use it as a supplement for other colonies. So we know that pollen is a rich source of protein for the bees, and a beekeeper might decide to trap and store some pollen just to supplement the colonies if there's a period of dearth. Maybe you're standing up a new colony just to kind of help accelerate that brood rearing. There's also a demand from people to purchase purchase pollen for its nutritional benefits. Because obviously, like I said, it contains proteins, vitamins, minerals, antioxidants. So a lot of places can sell it like as a health supplement. You definitely want to use caution anytime you're selling something that is intended for human consumption. Make sure you're following local rules, ordinances. You might have to put some kind of a statement on there that says, the following statements have not been evaluated by the FDA or whatever. Just make sure you're not breaking the law and having somebody suing you for whatever might happen to them. As an income source, right? Some people can take that pollen. You can sell it to other beekeepers to use as supplements within their hives. You can sell it to people who want to consume it. There's also a kind of like two other components to it. One of them being able to take the pollen, if you wanted to do a little bit of research to figure out exactly where it's coming from and what trees and plants are, that they're using as a source. Collecting some of that pollen in a pollen trap would definitely give you the ability to do that. There's also like an allergy component to it. So if people have talked about, I've heard different things about this over the years. For years, I'd heard that if you want to help with your allergies, have honey that is from within, 30 or 40, 50 miles of where you live. And it will be great, have a teaspoon of honey every day, and it'll help to, work on your seasonal allergies. I know so many people who swear by this. About 5-6 years ago, I heard a gal on the National Honey Show. She had a PhD. She was doing a presentation, and she was like, oh, yeah, and that whole thing that people always say about local honey working for allergies, yeah, there's no scientific evidence to support that. So I'm like, I don't know who's right on this one. I like honey. I eat it. I don't really care either way. I take Zyrtec, so it is what it is. But, if you did want to, if you had somebody who said, look, I believe that if I take a little bit of pollen and I sprinkle it in my smoothie every day, it helps my allergies, then let them have it. Okay, so how are we going to use this, or how are we going to collect this pollen? So we're going to use a pollen trap. This is going to be a device that will fit either over or under the hive entrance. So as the bees come into the hive, they're going to pass through a mesh or a grid, and that's going to knock the pollen off their legs and into a collection tray. So there's two primary kind of options you're going to have here. You have a front-mounted trap, or this is going to attach right there to the front of the entrance. Pretty easy to install and remove. And then there's going to be a bottom-mounted trap that would replace your bottom board. So there's kind of, again, pros and cons here. The one that's on the front is really easy. You can just kind of pop it on and off, not so invasive. But the one that is the bottom board style is, you're going to have to do some disassembly. You got to move hive components out of the way. I haven't used either of them, so I can't speak to one over the other. But like I said, I think I would try the front-mounted one first. If you're getting pretty good results with that, stick with that. That way you don't have to take everything apart every time you want to get your pollen out. Now, the couple of cautionary things here you really want to pay attention to, though. You only want to be using the traps when you have a strong pollen flow, because you don't want to deprive the colony of the resources that they need. So generally, the recommendation would be to put these on for, short periods of time. So a couple, 2-3 days a week, just to ensure that the colony still gets as much pollen as it needs to support their operations and their health. You need to monitor these daily, right? You want to check on them very regularly to make sure you don't have issues with mold or any spoilage of that collected pollen. Where I am here in the Mid-Atlantic and a lot of places in the Southeast, the humidity can get pretty brutal in the spring and summer. A lot of that moisture mixed in, you get some hot days, cold days. It can really vary a lot with the temperature, and it could, get those conditions just right for mold or something else kind of funky to grow on that. So you want to pay attention to them because of the fact that it is, highly perishable, really based on its moisture content. So when you want to store it, right, you've extracted it, you want to put it away and use it later on. A couple of things to keep in mind here. You're going to want to dry it out. Just spread a thin layer on a dehydrator and let that run for a little while and take the moisture out. Or you can put it out in a well-ventilated area and just let it dry out there. But the ideal moisture content is going to be less than 10%. Now you can freeze the pollen, and that'll allow it to keep for 1 to 2 years. So that's definitely a great longer-term strategy. You can collect it. You might get into a habit of saying, okay, I'm going to collect for a 2-week period every May, and I'm going to put this in the colonies, every April or every March, so they have a little bit of a boost in the spring. They definitely need an infusion of pollen early in the spring to ramp up that brood rearing. You can also put it in the refrigerator, but it's only going to be good for a few months in the fridge. So if you took some, maybe again in May, you could put some back again in August or September as they're ramping up for those winter bees. But again, pay very close attention to any signs of spoilage, mold growth, any funky smells. If it starts to get real clumpy, that can be an issue too. Now, there are some downsides to the pollen traps that, it's one of those things where just be smart about it, think about it, and it's pretty intuitive. But obviously, it reduces the amount of pollen that's available to the colony. So that could potentially impact brood development. Now, if you're doing it at the right time of year and you're throttling it a little bit, there should be plenty of pollen for everybody. It shouldn't be an issue. But if you have a colony that's a newer colony, maybe you started them from package bees, right? If you started a colony from package bees, don't start trapping pollen. Leave them alone. Just let them do their thing. But you got to remember, there is more work, more labor involved because you're taking some of their work away from them. We talked about the risk of the pollen possibly spoiling if it's collected and not dried promptly. So make sure you're doing that. And again, don't do this for long periods of time. Prolonged trapping can definitely weaken the colony if it's done excessively. So just in moderation, like anything else. Also, pay attention to the traps that you're buying them from a reputable supplier, reading reviews for them, and really paying attention to them, because poorly designed traps can actually injure or even kill the returning foragers. So pay really, really close attention to how your bees are interacting with that trap. Now, this is an area that I'd like to minimize liability anywhere I can. There's always somebody who wants to sue you for something, and I just, I try to disconnect myself as much as I can from areas that introduce liability. But if you want to sell it, I think selling it to somebody to say, hey, here's some for you to put in your beehives, not a bad idea. I think to say, hey, if this is something you want to take and put on your breakfast cereal or in your smoothie or whatever you want to do with your, from a meal food consumption standpoint, that's where I get nervous. But if that's what you're comfortable with and you've looked into it, you know what the laws, regulations, ordinances are, by all means. But like I said, make sure it's fully dried, free of debris. You don't want any contaminants in there, anything that could look out of the ordinary. Use airtight containers, sealed, vacuum sealed glass jars, whatever you have that can seal everything out and minimize, any moisture. When you label it, different places if it's a food for consumption thing, they're going to have their rules. But in general, it's a good idea to kind of mark the harvest date, where you got it from, what it is, like whatever, spring wildflower in Virginia, or, whatever's applicable to your area. And then maybe write some instructions on there like, hey, keep frozen for best quality or for long-term storage or something like that. Now, if you wanted to market this, you can certainly emphasize, hey, there's health benefits from sourcing local pollen and things like that. But again, you got to be mindful of what you're allowed to say on the packaging, what you have to say on the packaging, and make sure that you don't say something that you can't back up with some scientific fact. Because if you say, hey, this is going to be really good for you for fighting allergies, and you don't have anything to support that, somebody might try and sue you for it, because that's what people kind of do sometimes. And when we talked about buying it somebody, from a reputable supplier. So, like a Man Lake, I think Foxhound Bee Company has traps, Better Bee. I mean, all of your big, reputable bee suppliers are probably going to have, what you're looking for here. If you decide to go with something that somebody would refer to as a air quotes, like cheap Chinese knockoff or whatever, that's a whole thing that drives me nuts. The Chinese people, like as a country, as a people, they make great stuff. If you go to them and say, hey, make the absolute cheapest widget you can make and make it look like this, they're going to make you something that's really cheap. Just because it's made in the USA doesn't mean it was made with good stuff in the USA, right? If you tell them, hey, make something really great, they're going to make something really great. They're going to charge you for it, but they're going to make it great. But what you have to watch out for is sometimes, as an example, you might buy a plastic item that is a pollen trap, and you look online, it's $10. And you can go to AliExpress and you can get 20 of them for $5. And you're like, wow, they look the same. But the plastic that the AliExpress ones have is not the same kind of plastic that the ones you bought, that you can buy locally here. And they're going to fall apart. They're going to break. They're going to be, so it's again, what quality were they made with? I like to do a balance with stuff like that. Like I ordered some mite wash containers for the price of one container in the US. I got 10 of them, and they came in, they looked identical to the name brand ones that are going for like $20-25 a piece. And I got, I think, it was like 10 of them for $12 or something like that. And they work great. No issues. But again, you got to be careful when you're buying things from sources that, that you can't speak to the reputation of. Well, folks, that is all I've got for you on the pollen trapping. I am not a huge pollen trapper proponent kind of thing. I'm a big fan of, letting the bees do what they got to do, letting them find things on their own, placing them where they can best, be successful. As an example, at my house, I know how many colonies I can support at my house, and I can't put 100 colonies here. I can put 20. I can put, I don't know what the rules are. I can put 5, but I can, my house, I can support 20 colonies of bees here. There's enough forage around for that, but it's tight, down in my, at the apiary property I can support, 150 or 200 colonies at that property pretty easily. It's difficult sometimes to gauge that until you've seen how productive or unproductive an area might be. Again, this is something that I would really encourage you to, if you want to do this for yourself, like let's say that somebody told you that, hey, pollen's really good to sprinkle on your whatever, your cream cheese bagel or whatever, try it. Absolutely. But just be mindful, be really, really mindful that, this is a critical component to the health of the bees and you're taking it away from them. I don't like taking from the bees if I don't have to. I'm really reserved about even taking honey. If I know I've got a good surplus, I'll take it. But in my mind, I'm like, if I leave this honey here and it's here in the spring, I can start making nukes off of the surplus really easily. Or I can make, 4 or 5 colonies with the resources that are left over, and I don't have to wait. I don't have to wait a month or 6 weeks. Anyway, there's always a lot of variables. I can ramble about this all day long. If you guys have any questions, jump into the Discord room, chat with us over there. Check out the YouTube channel. It's just youtube.com, and then it's at Beekeeping for Newbies, NEWBEES over there. You can always email me, Jeff@beekeepingfornewbies.com. Outside of that, folks, take care, be kind to one another, and remember that I love you, and there's nothing you can do about it. We'll talk to you soon.